I will call Michelle Welsh to move the motion, and I will then call the Minister to respond. Can I remind all other members present that they may only make a speech with prior permission from the member in charge of the debate and the Minister. They can, of course, intervene without that permission, and there will not be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up, as is the convention for 30-minute debates. Can I also mention that it is highly likely we'll be interrupted for votes in the course of this debate, and I'm anticipating 2 votes. That means that I must suspend the sitting for up to 25 minutes, but I think that if the Honourable Lady and the Minister and I are all back before 25 minutes, we can proceed more quickly, if that's any incentive. I call Michelle Welsh to move the motion.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Since being elected nearly 2 years ago, my office and I have been inundated with letters and calls from staff, prisoners and members of the public regarding the conditions at a prison in my constituency, HMP Loudham Grange. I've heard from prisoners about repeated reports of self-harm, deaths in the prison and instances of discrimination. I've also been contacted by staff sharing the impact these incidences have had on them and of pressures such as staffing and violence. These unsafe conditions are deeply concerning, not only in their own right, but as a reflection of the wider challenges facing our justice system. To truly improve safety in our justice system, we must tackle the drivers of this violence. I want to thank the Minister for recently visiting HMP Loudham Grange after I raised concerns with him. As you will be aware, just yesterday, the Inspectorate released their report into the most recent inspection. It was reassuring to see some progress in areas such as visible leadership, improving the health services and security relating to drugs. However, I remain deeply concerned about ongoing problems relating to self-harm and suicide.
And I thought we should give way.
I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I wonder if she agrees that prison safety cannot be separated from mental health. And when inmates are in crisis, they can self-harm. There is the potential of dying through suicide, but also it affects potentially staff and their safety, and it can affect other prisoners as well. So I just wondered if she agrees with me that we need to tackle both physical safety and mental health as well.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and he's absolutely right. As you hear as I continue with my speech, this is absolutely needs to go hand in hand.
My honourable friend, give way.
I will give way.
I would like to congratulate my honourable friend on securing this really important debate, and to agree with our analysis so far. And the key point is we really must take some steps, some initiatives to reduce prison violence. I'm sure the Minister is aware that in the last session I introduced a private member's bill to place a duty on all prison management to minimise violence against prisoners and staff. And one of the ways we could do this is with key performance indicators and specific targets for reducing assaults. And then prison governors would have an incentive to take action, halt the reduce the number of assaults, halt the loss of experienced prison staff, and I really think it's worthy of further consideration. Does my honourable friend agree that that's a potential solution?
Thank you, and thank you for your intervention. I absolutely agree. In fact, some of the accounts that prison staff have told me, in particular women prison officers, is actually quite deplorable. The Inspectorate notes that there had been 2 self-inflicted deaths in the previous 2 years. Support for those at risk of self-harm was weak, and that the rate of self-harm was increased by 50%, with serious incidents requiring hospital also doubling. The risk cannot be allowed to continue. More must be done to support prisoners and support staff in addressing these issues. I'm also concerned that the processes for notifying the prison of a risk to life are wholly inadequate. The information publicly available directs individuals to the safer custody line, yet there appears to be insufficient training for operators handling potentially life-threatening situations. My team and I have frequently found ourselves guiding operators through the appropriate steps or being placed on hold while advice is sought from a supervisor. In some cases, we have been asked to leave a voicemail with a promised response within 24 hours. This is somebody that is threatening to take their life, I hasten to add. If a prisoner is actively attempting to take their own life, I think we can all agree 24 hours is far too long. When we are put through to the orderly officer, there have been numerous occasions, in fact many occasions, in which no one answers, and we are again forced to leave a voicemail on a separate line. On those occasions that we do speak with the officer, we are reassured that a welfare check will take place. We have found that these checks often do not take place, or when they are, an officer simply looks through the door before moving on. These concerns are reflected in the inspectorate's findings. Care plans under ACCT procedures were judged to be poor, with most prisoners not engaged in education, training or work, and with few meaningful activities identified to support them. I will.
On Friday, I visited HMP Wandsworth with the Chess in Schools and Community scheme, and their work to teach chess in prisons, and it's great in terms of teaching resilience, patience, and team working. I wonder if I could send the honourable member some information about what chess in schools and communities do, because it may be useful in the institution that she's talking about.
Thank you for your intervention, and absolutely, thank you. Access to appropriate healthcare is another example of shortcomings. Prisoners often do not have access to their prescription medication, do not have access to mental health services, and their medical or religious dietary needs are not met. The inspector also raised that prisoners with disabilities are living in neglectful conditions. Discrimination has no place in our society and no place in prisons either. I urge the Minister to treat this issue as a matter of urgency. I fear that if action is not taken quickly, one of these incidents of self-harm will lead to another preventable death. I'd now like to move on to staff. I very much welcome that the Government has taken steps to reduce the threat that is posed to our prison officers. Whilst numbers remain unacceptably high, the rate of assault and serious assaults on staff has reduced. I also welcome that the Government has now increased the number of stab-proof vests from 750 to 10,000, and that 500 officers will be trained on the use of tasers for the most serious incidents of violence. However, I support the Prison Officers Association in calling for protective equipment to be available to all officers, not only those in high security settings. Prison officers put their safety on the line every day to protect the public. The least we can do is ensure they have the protection they need. Can the Minister tell me if there are any plans to make protective equipment available to all officers?
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I'm grateful, and my honourable friend's making an excellent speech. But on this point about the protection of prison officers, isn't it correct that the last coalition government got rid of almost 25% of prison officers? Every year, Sir Jeremy, I ask a question about how many prison officers have left the service, and each year it increases. We've lost 100,000 years collectively of jail craft through prison officers, experienced officers who've left the service. And once again, it's a key issue that we need to address if we're going to attack this issue of violence against other prisoners and against staff.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and one would think that you are able to read my speech over my shoulder, because that is exactly the next thing that I'm going to talk to. There remains a staffing crisis across our prisons, with officer numbers falling and many leaving the profession after only 1 or 2 years. I would therefore ask the Minister, as my honourable friend has, what steps the Government is taking to improve staff retention, given its direct impact on prison safety. Our prisons are losing out on experienced members of staff, resulting in officers who often do not have the experience or the training handling the situations that they are dangerously unprepared for. And finally, I'd like to raise the impact the safety of prisons has on the wider public. Time and time again, speaking with residents in the local police force, I'm told of this endless cycle of incarceration and offending that is plaguing our streets. The local police and shop owners in Hucknall, in my constituency, for example, know the exact offenders who steal from their businesses. The police do all they can. They collect evidence, they make arrests, they bring offenders to trial, but they know that in a year's time, those individuals will be back on the street committing the very same offences in the very same community. This is not a sustainable system. Discussions about rehabilitation and treatment of prisoners are often overlooked or trivialised. but access to addiction support, healthcare and education is essential if offenders are to break the cycle of crime. As long as our prisons do not provide adequate rehabilitation, our streets will never be safe.
I will. I thank the Honourable Member for giving way and securing this really important debate. I also went to HMP Wandsworth not very long ago, and one thing they did show me, there was an incident on the wing when they were called for an urgent, something happened, and they had to shut all the doors and run, and that was a horrible, just an example of what they deal with every day. So the violence is there and it's real, and I've seen it. But they also had there, they'd just set up a neurodivergent wing, and that seemed to make, I spoke to some of the prisoners there, and that seemed to have made a real difference to them. When you're talking about rehabilitation, they had access to therapists, they were out of their cells doing things in the day. That seemed to be a model that worked well, and would she agree that's something that maybe could be looked at rolling out on a wider scale, considering how we know how many, particularly male prisoners now, have autistic traits?
And I thank my Honourable Friend for your intervention, and absolutely, and ask the Minister, if he hasn't been to Wandsworth, to see that, then that's perhaps something that he would be able to do going forward. Offenders cannot focus on rebuilding their lives if they are struggling simply to survive or experiencing thoughts of ending their own lives. I hope that the Minister shares my concerns about the safety and well-being of prisoners and staff at HMP Loudon Grange and takes immediate steps to support the prisoners and the safety of prison officers. Thank you.
This House has considered safety in prisons. Minister.
Sir Jeremy Chair, and I want to thank my honourable friend, the member for Sherwood Forest, for securing this debate and for bringing attention to this very important subject through this debate, but also she is on numerous occasions in the Chamber and elsewhere has spoken with Lord Timpson, the Minister for Prisons, and myself on this issue. She's been a champion for inmates, staff at Loudon Grange, and of course family as well. And I also want to place on record her staff, because I know that it's not just the Member of Parliament who deals with these very difficult, complex and draining issues, but also parliamentary staff in the constituency and in her parliamentary office who have very difficult conversations, and I know go above and beyond to try and help her constituents, and indeed people who sometimes aren't her constituents as well. And so I think it's right that I place on my record my thanks for not just bringing this attention to me and to the government, but also...
Sorry to interrupt the Minister, but I must now suspend the sitting for up to 25 minutes, and we will proceed when we are all reassembled.
Right. Good.
Right, Minister, you ready to proceed? Right.
Wait until 2.
Wait until 32, yeah.
Or we can just wait and say that was good. We've got most of the people in for the next one anyway. So
Yeah, I think we can crack on, don't we? Let's just crack on. Goodness.
Right, order. So the sitting is now resumed and the debate may now continue until 4:50 if necessary. Minister.
Chair, as I was saying before we were interrupted by votes, I want to put on record my thanks to the member for Sherwood Forest and her team, and indeed the member for Gedling, her neighbour as well, who's raised this issue with me. And as she intimated in her opening speech, I, on the back of her representations, visited HMP Loudon Grange in April, and I had an important meeting with the Governor and her leadership team there, where I raised many of the concerns raised by my humble friend, and was reassured to a large degree that I felt there was a leadership team there that understood the issues, were working at pace to attempt to address them. But I also want to place on my record that I was challenging of the work that needs to be done, and we've seen just in the report published yesterday, whilst there has been improvements, there is absolutely no doubt there is a long way to go, and I hope that the Governor and the leadership team at HMP Loudon Grange would agree with that. And there is more work to do there and elsewhere, because poor safety in our prisons fundamentally reflects a system under strain. And this is a prison system that this government inherited that was essentially in crisis, in utter collapse in the summer of 2024, very shortly or very soon to run out of places completely. Too many prisons are still struggling at or near capacity, with an increased risk of violence hampering their efforts to turn offenders' lives around, as we've heard, and I'll go on to address some of the particular issues. But we have taken fundamental action to reduce the risk linked to capacity challenges. And ultimately, you can only do all the good work on reoffending, on education, on rehabilitation, if you have a functioning prison system. That's why we're delivering 14,000 new prison places, the biggest expansion of the estate since the Victorian era. We're investing £4.7 billion in that prison building programme over the next 4 years. And we have introduced landmark sentencing reforms, the Sentencing Act, which received royal assent just earlier this year, to finally put the prison system on a sustainable footing for the future. And that Sentencing Act is not easy. There are difficult decisions that have been made, but that legislation, for the first time in essentially a generation, means we know that we can reassure the British public that there will always be prison spaces for those offenders when we need it. But there is much more to be done on rehabilitation, on education, on mental health support, and I accept that absolutely. Of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I know he's a huge champion of men's and boys' mental health in particular. I have in my constituency Moorlands, Lindome and Hatfield prisons, and I just wondered if he'd join me in celebrating the amazing work that's done by the Samaritans locally in those prisons to support people, but also Andy's Man's Club as well.
Absolutely, and I thank my humble friend. I'm a massive champion for Andy's Man Clubs up and down the country, but especially in South Yorkshire, and they do really important work with ex-offenders and indeed more generally. And on Samaritans, we've continued as a government to fund the Samaritans Listener Scheme, which trains prisoners to support others in crisis. It's a brilliant initiative that I would urge any parliamentarian to engage with in their area. I just want to quickly touch upon what we're doing to try and protect our prison staff, because that was an issue raised by numerous members. We've invested £15 million in protective equipment, including up to 10,000 units of protective body armour. And as my honourable friend, I think, set out in her opening speech, that is a transformative approach to protecting our prison officers to what the previous government were able to do. Half of these are allocated to long-term and high security estate, including HMP Loudon Grange. So as we roll out body armour across the LTHSE, the long-term high security estate, HMP Loudon Grange will benefit from that. It's why all staff in the adult male estate now have access to body-worn video cameras, batons, rigid bar handcuffs and synthetic pepper spray as part of their standard equipment. It's why in the youth custody service we've introduced PAVA. Very, very difficult decisions and considerations that have to be made, but the right decision to ensure that we protect prison officers both in the youth estate and the adult estate. It's why we've trained and equipped up to 500 additional officers in the use of tasers. It's why we're already installing up to 50 ligature-resistant cells to prevent self-harm and have confirmed funding to install more. And because safety and security are innately intertwined, it's why the Deputy Prime Minister has announced an extra £35 million this year to improve security at the 17 of our most at-risk prisons. And this is on top of the £40 million that we have already invested. Up to 13,000 new heavy-duty steel window grills will be in place by next spring. So the picture is getting better. We have stabilised the prison system. We are investing in security measures, but there is a lot more work to be done. The rate of assaults on staff has decreased under this government by 4.5%. I accept that's a modest figure, but it's in the right direction, while the rate of self-harm has also decreased by 8%. But I accept absolutely that it's far too high. And as a minister who shares responsibility for this area with my friend in the other place, we get regular updates as to serious incidents in prisons, and they are far too frequent and far too serious, and much more has to be done. Absolutely, always.
No, sir, can I thank you first of all for outlining the issues that outlined, but one of the real issues and critical problems in prison is the mental health crisis. People coming in with complex needs and emotional needs, sometimes addiction issues, and maybe abuse in the past as well. Those are things that need to be addressed. You can do all the body armour and all the things that need to be done as you should, but you need to address that. Sorry, the Minister and Government needs to address that as well.
Absolutely, and the NHS work in our prisons up and down the country every day and do incredible work, in fact. And we have bolstered the approach for people identified as at risk of suicide and self-harm, a comprehensive package of support for our what's called individualised case management process, which sounds technical, but it's very important that for the first time we are treating prisoners, looking at their needs and their history in a much more tailored and individual approach. And as I mentioned earlier in response to the member for Doncaster East and the Isle of Axelholme, Isle of Axelholme, we continue to fund the Samaritans Listener Scheme, which is a really important part, but much more needs to be done, so I accept the Honourable Member's point. Security and drugs, I want to touch upon this. Honourable Members will be aware that one of the biggest drivers of serious violence and instability is the influx of contraband, and particularly drugs. If you go to any prison up and down the country, essentially of any category, perhaps the most number one issue that will keep a governor up at night is security and drugs. We inherited a prison system awash with a shocking amount of drugs. They compromise not only the safety of hard-working staff and the prisoners themselves, but make it far harder for staff to do the important work that turn lives around. That is why we're tackling drugs on every front. We have invested in drug-detecting dogs. We have machines to detect drugs impregnated into paper and fabric. And we have X-ray body scanners across the whole adult male estate now. But drones certainly continue to be a significant challenge. We are investing in state-of-the-art technology, and indeed my colleague Lord Timpson was in Ukraine recently to look at the technology that they're using as part of the war effort and what we can learn in terms of how we invest in securing, in particular, our high-security estate. My honourable friend has raised valid and specific concerns about safety at HMP Loudon Grange. She will know the prison was brought under public management following serious issues with safety and security under the previous private provider. During my visit in April, I was encouraged by the progress being made. I have seen a much stronger approach to managing individuals at risk of self-harm or suicide. And we have supported HMP Loudon Grange by additional investment in safety resources, better staff training and closer working with healthcare partners. Through the long-term and high-security estate task force, further action is being taken to tackle weapons and drugs in our prisons, and these measures are beginning to have an impact. His Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons conducted an independent review of progress in May and published their findings yesterday, as I said. They confirmed that the prison has made progress and has a clear path to improve safety and security. So I want to reassure her, and indeed my honourable friend, the member for Gedling and others, that together with my colleague Lord Timpson, I remain fully committed to improving safety at HMP Loudon Grange and making sure it receives sustained attention and action from the government. The Governor has also assured me personally that she and her team will continue to work with my honourable friend and other local MPs, and she will shortly be invited back into the prison herself if she wants to take up that invitation to see that progress and ask any questions that she has. Chair, to finish, I want to again place on record my thanks to the honourable friend for securing this important debate, for her continued advocacy on behalf of her constituents and for the opportunity for me to respond. The challenges facing our prison system are significant, and we do not underestimate them, nor do we shy away from them. The government is investing, modernising and taking action to make our prisons safer for staff and prisoners alike, and above all, better able to deliver the rehabilitation that cuts crime, reduces reoffending and protects the British public. That is the progress we are making, and that is the work we will continue to drive forward.
Thank you. The question, therefore, is that this House has considered safety in prisons. As many as are of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.